Hey, this is Scott Spears, and I'd like to welcome you to yet another edition of the Exchange Club, and maybe one of the most interesting episodes of the Exchange Club you will ever tune into. I want to let everybody know it's the last taping before Election Day here in the United States in 2024. Election Day will be November 5th, just days away. Trump versus Harris. It's going to be something. Tune in to WGH Talk Radio. On Tuesday night, election night, our live election coverage will begin at 7:15 p.m. and we will not leave the air until we know who has won everything. You're not going to miss that. Want to miss that for love nor money. The whole team will be here. We'll have people stationed at the Board of Elections. It is going to be something to behold. You can get WGH Talk by going to the website, www.1071.com, just clicking play. You can listen to the whole thing live, or download the absolutely free TuneIn app on any mobile device. You can listen on your smart TV, you can listen on your Alexa, your Google Dot, your cell phone, your tablet, your computer, your laptop, whatever you have. Tune in Tuesday at 7:15. It's going to be worth your time. Or every weekday morning, any weekday morning, we'll have election pre-shows and election wrap-up on my show, 8:15 to 10 a.m. every morning next week. It is going to be something from the 4th of November through the end of the week. And the election of the 47th President of the United States. Will it be the 45th President, or will it be the Vice President? We shall all find out. Possibly history could be made. The first female President of the United States, or the first former President to ever be re-elected in non-consecutive terms. History will be made on Tuesday night, November the 5th, no matter whom wins. Plus, we'll have all the local election coverage. Joined on this episode by Matt Morgan and the 15th President of the United States, my good pal, Mr. James Buchanan, President 1857 to 1861. Served immediately prior to the Civil War, remains the only president ever to be elected from Pennsylvania and to remain a lifelong bachelor. Tall, stately, stiffly formal in his high stock he wore around his jowls. James Buchanan was the only president never to be married. Presiding over a rapidly dividing nation, Buchanan grasped inadequately the political realities of the time, relying on constitutional doctrines to close the widening rift over slavery. He failed to understand that the North would not accept constitutional arguments which favored the South, nor could he realize how sectionalism had realigned political parties. The Democrats split, which he was a Democrat. The Whigs were destroyed, the party of George Washington, giving rise to the Republicans, which gave us whom many people was the greatest president of the United States, the man who followed you, Abraham Lincoln. Think about that. There may have not been an Abraham Lincoln had there not been a James Buchanan, and I hate to say this, who had done such a bad job that gave us...
Thank you very much.
Well, no, that's what the paperwork says. Okay, so there we go. That's all you need to know about James Buchanan at this point. But we're glad to have you here, President Buchanan.
Thank you.
And you will be at dinner with the presidents Saturday, November 2nd at 4:30. All Occasions Catering, 6989 Waldo, Delaware Road. It's going to be a humdinger, you can guarantee that. Benjamin Harrison, Herbert Hoover, Harry Truman, James Madison, Martin Van Buren, U.S. Grant, you'll be there. Warren Harding, it's going to be something. Don't miss it. Saturday, November 2nd, 4:30 p.m. All Occasions Catering, 6989 Waldo, Delaware Road in Waldo. 14th Annual Dinner with the Presidents, November 2nd at 4:30 p.m. The Historical Society does a great job putting that event on. All right. President Buchanan, are you glad to be back?
I'm here.
Well, there you go. That's all you need.
Did you mean, am I glad to be back?
With
alive?
Me. With me.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that too. You got up out of the grave and walked over, and I appreciate that.
It was very uncomfortable.
Are you buried in Pennsylvania?
Yes. I forget the name of the little cemetery.
Are you in your hometown?
Yeah.
That you retired to? Wheathead?
It's outside of there. Yeah.
Wheatland? Do you have a memorial?
Yes, I do.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Is it big?
Relatively big. Not like what's here.
President. Yeah. Well, do you have a little memorial envy?
I have a little envy of all the presidents who were given a little bit better shake than I was. Yes.
Now, do you think that you were given a poor shake, or do you think you did a poor job?
Well, let's put it this way. I was considered one of the finest governmental employees and office holders up until I became the President of the United States. One of the finest. Everybody who talked to, and still does talk about me, say how wonderful I was prior to becoming president. So why did I all of a sudden turn rotten like an apple? Well, I think, yes, I got a little bit of a raw deal, and I also came into office at the wrong time.
You know what's interesting? You know who you remind me of?
Who's that?
Herbert Hoover.
Okay.
Because Herbert Hoover, this was after you were long dead, but
I read about it.
You read about him. During the 1920s and going into the 30s, America loved Herbert Hoover.
Yeah.
Both parties courted him to be their candidate for president. They wanted him to run for president, and he continually turned it down. He did a great job in his other offices in government, and then he became president, and the Great Depression happened, and he's a one-term president who goes down as one of the worst presidents of all time. Yet they loved this man, and they wanted him to be president. But on his watch, because of his inadequacies, one of the worst events ever happened, the Great Depression, and he's considered one of the worst. And it seems like the same happened with you. You did such a good job in what you were doing that they wanted you to become president. You became president, and then you really just made some horrible decisions that led to the Dred Scott decision. And interestingly enough, just to point this out for history's purposes, your horrible presidency gave us Abraham Lincoln, who people think is the greatest president of all time, number one, and Herbert Hoover's horrible presidency gave us Franklin Roosevelt, who people think is the third greatest president of all time. Think about that.
That is interesting, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Feel free to bring that up at the dinner.
I will be glad to.
On Saturday.
Hopefully I won't be speaking about that, but okay.
But don't you find those ironies?
That is quite ironic, and it does point to one of the problems that almost all presidents have, is what's going on in the world around you will affect your presidency more than even you can possibly affect your presidency. Like right now, we have a tremendous financial and economic boon, and that some people are trying to make the main thing on one side of the aisle. On the other side of the aisle, they're trying to say it's terrible, but whatever's happening in the history of the United States at the time kind of molds the president. And I would venture to say that they have not little to do with that, but not as much as most people think.
Well, and it's also very interesting to me, before I bring Matt in here, it's also interesting that you being a Democrat at the time, you were coming from a long line of Democratic presidents. Polk was a Democrat, I believe. Yes, Pierce was a Democrat.
Yeah.
And then came you. And then you essentially destroyed the Democratic Party for a time, which gave way to Abraham Lincoln and the rise of the Republican Party. And I could also say the same for Herbert Hoover. He had come from Harding. He had come from Coolidge. Hoover was a Republican, and then smashed it to smithereens, and Franklin Roosevelt held into Truman, Democrats hold the office for 16 years.
That's what happens when you're a president and the world around you changes while you're a president. Once upon a time, you're looked at as a great savior, and 3 weeks later, you're looked upon as the biggest pariah to come down the pike. And that happened to both of us, apparently.
Well, and I think here's my final point on this, is I believe that high expectations for both of you caused problems.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
And gave great failure, let down, that not only didn't you live up to the expectations, that you both had horrible things happen on your watch. And here, Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt, they were following two failed presidents, so anything would have been considered great.
Well, in my term, the slavery and the secession from the Union were a dark cloud even before I got there. They were starting to roll across the horizon. And I think, unfortunately, I wish I had better leadership. I wish I had been more determinative with what I was going to do, but I tended to think let's see where it goes. And that was probably the bad choice. I should have been more forceful.
And also, your presidency gave way to a wartime president, Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, and Hoover's presidency gave way to Franklin Roosevelt, a wartime president, World War II. So there you go. All right, Matt, come on in.
I do think that President Buchanan gets a little bit of a. I do think that it's a little unfair to call him one of the worst, because I mean, like he said, it does. I mean, the situation with the South and slavery, and the division in America was certainly not a new thing. It wasn't found. It wasn't like it didn't start on his watch. It was already there in motion, and maybe he didn't do as much as he could have to stop it or slow it down. But I think that the Civil War is probably inevitable.
Well, now, maybe. Because what we know is that President-elect Buchanan thought the crisis would disappear if he maintained a sectional balance in his appointments, and he could persuade people to accept constitutional law as the Supreme Court interpreted it. And we might as well restate this on this episode, because people might be watching this who didn't watch the other that myself and President Buchanan did. He, in his inaugural, was asked about the territorial question. And his quote was, "Happily, a matter of but little practical importance." And he said the Supreme Court was about to settle it speedily and finally. And 2 days later, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney delivered the Dred Scott decision, asserting that Congress had no constitutional power to deprive persons of their property rights in slaves in the territories. Southerners loved it, but it created a furor in the North. And what does President Buchanan do with that? Gets another strike.
I made Nebraska or
Kansas.
a slave state.
He goes to Kansas by the urging of his admission, and he made it a slave state. And then he directed his presidential authority to this goal, and further angered the Republicans and alienated members of his own party. So he ticked off the other party and his own party, because Kansas remained a territory anyway. Why in the world would you do that right off the bat?
Well, hindsight is 20/20, and he made a poor choice there. I made a very poor choice there because I didn't foresee that. I also thought it would wash. I really didn't think that there was as big a fervor especially about Kansas, as it turned out to be a range war for several
Yes,
months.
bloody Kansas.
Yeah.
Yeah, but why? I understand that you thought the Supreme Court was going to handle this.
Yeah.
Clearly, you did not have your pulse on that one.
No.
So they come in, do the exact opposite of what apparently you suggested they would do, but you don't. But see, this is what I don't understand about President Buchanan yourself, is that when you were asked about it at your inaugural, you said this is happily a matter of but little practical importance.
I truly didn't think it was as important as it was.
Right,
That
but-
was a bad choice.
But 2 days later, when Dred Scott comes down, all of a sudden you bring your presidential authority down to Kansas and do exactly what the Dred Scott decision said not to do. So you didn't do what the Supreme Court was saying anyway.
It's a little tougher position than you think. Being the President of the United States, especially if you're trying to mollycoddle both sides, which I was, and was a very bad choice of what I did, you're gonna make both sides angry by not taking it.
When was the John Brown Rebellion?
I don't remember.
No, but what I will say about this Kansas episode is that when the Republicans then won your enemies won a plurality in the House in 1858, and every significant bill they passed fell before Southern votes in the Senate, they didn't pass them, or you vetoed them. So again, you were getting your
again,
figures involved.
Like I told you in the earlier, when we were talking earlier in the last episode, I had a lot of friends that were Southerners, and I sympathized with a lot of them because I knew they were going to lose their homes. I knew their families were going to be cast out. If we did away with the slavery, most of them wouldn't be able to continue on. And I felt sorry for them, and that was a bad choice.
But here's the, and I'm going to let Matt get in. Here's the confusion, though, with those events laid out, and just to lay them out for people who are paying attention, because history is important. You, on your inaugural, say you don't think this is important.
Right.
Basically, they're asking you territorial, but it's slavery. You think it's not important. It's not of practical importance. And then, when the Supreme Court says slavery is okay, good deal, you go into a state that turns out not to want slavery, and you try to force slavery on a state that didn't have it. And then when that blew up in your face, and the opposing party won power because of that, then every law they tried to pass, you vetoed.
Well, it was my opinion that they were in the wrong, and that I believed that the people of Kansas truly did want to follow what they were saying they wanted to follow, and that would be slavery. And it was a choice I made that probably was wrong.
Once again, I think that maybe how he handled the whole Bleeding Kansas incident might have been handled wrong, but I don't know that you can necessarily blame Buchanan for that. I mean, when Kansas was up for debate of becoming a state, they basically left it up to Kansas to determine whether or not they wanted to become a slave state. They did. So then, like, a whole bunch of refugees, I don't know what else to call them, I guess just people from Southern supporters, so slavery supporters, and then Northern supporters all just kind of rushed to Kansas to, like, boost the numbers in their favor. So, I mean, it just kind of became
Who would ever do that?
And then it just kind of became, now you have a whole bunch of people who fervently support, slavery, who have migrated there to boost it in their favor. Now you have a whole bunch of people who fervently support. I don't know that you could put that on.
Now wait a sec. No, I can't put that the Southerners came into Kansas.
Oh, but the Northerners did too. Northerners did as well.
Right, and I can't put that on Buchanan. But what Buchanan does when this happens, as the chief executive of the country, as the president, he uses his presidential authority to go in there and not stay neutral. He definitely picks a side. And he says, listen, we're going to make this a slave state by my authority.
I tried to be, I tried to show some, excuse me, I tried to show that I knew how to sneeze. No, I tried to be.
Still get you choked up.
I tried to be a little bit more decisive in that situation, and maybe I was wrong.
I think perhaps the fact that, I don't know which one came first, and I don't know. So did Bleeding Kansas come first, or did it come down first that it was gonna be?
I wasn't alive.
Well, I mean,
you have to look it up.
It came second.
Bleeding Kansas came second
after the decision to become a state or a territory.
After the decision to whether or not it was going to be a slave state or not.
Oh,
right.
I can't honestly tell you. I think it was after.
So, I mean, if it was after, then I guess it might have more to do with Buchanan, because if Buchanan came down and said that, then that's a whole different thing. But if he did it after the whole Bleeding Kansas thing, he might have done it in order to, regain some control of Kansas per se, because they were basically in like a civil war of their own.
Yes, they were.
Yeah, but by saying it's a slave state.
Yeah, but are you supposed to let them fight it out? I mean, I think that.
But it didn't become a slave state.
No, it didn't.
It sounds like they lost the Civil War then.
No, the Civil War hadn't happened. This is what I don't understand.
Of Kansas.
Right. Well, yeah, but President Buchanan, he's the president, and you say you got 50-50 there, and you can't blame this on Buchanan. Buchanan sends his presidential authority to tip the scales towards slave state, and even with his foot on the slave state scale, it still goes the opposite way, which is what destroys him, essentially.
Well, there were a lot of things that destroyed me, and that was the lack of being definitive in most decisions.
But essentially that led to the rise of the Republicans in 1858,
It did.
which gave you no power in the House anymore. And then because they were passing everything in the House because they had the majority, you were just vetoing everything, so government came to an absolute standstill during that time.
It was about a 50-50, if I recall correctly, about a 50-50 Congress at the time, and it wasn't overwhelmingly one way or the other.
No, but there was no Republican Party prior to you.
Right.
So
Called
you
Whigs.
gave them. you gave way essentially to the Republican Party.
They were called the Whigs before, I believe, and they lost their leadership, and therefore there was a two-party system. It just wasn't in the same name.
It just sounds like the Democrats were whipping the Whigs for many, many years, and you came in with all the power in the world as the Democratic Party is at its strongest point, to the point where the Supreme Court gives the country essentially slavery. And because of this whole thing in Kansas, had there not been Kansas and a bad decision by President Buchanan, all of a sudden the Republicans take the House. It makes government look very poor because instead of trying to get along with the Republicans at that point, President Buchanan vetoes everything they try to send through. So they get ticked. The Democratic Party splits into two factions, and Abraham Lincoln slides in the next presidency.
And you don't understand that why?
No, I understand it. I just think it's
just the way
bad.
it happened.
But it's bad.
I didn't say it was good.
So, but Matt disagrees with that and says it wasn't Buchanan's fault.
I did not say. I
It
said
can't
that.
be all my fault.
Yeah, I said that you can't place all of the blame on Buchanan. I mean, like I said, like Buchanan didn't like tell anybody to like go murder each other in Kansas.
No.
Like he might have made a decree, but I don't know how much that had to do with the people that murdered each other. But
Well, since we've got you here, I guess, Mike, why during your inaugural did you feel it was so insignificant, slavery, but then within a very short period of time, you are enforcing slavery with your presidential authority in Kansas?
It seemed very, the time you're talking about, the early part of that, it seemed to be not a major consequence. Then it didn't take long to find out the direction that the Supreme Court was going to go, and I found out it was of consequence, so I switched my allegiance on that.
I wonder, did you know, it was only 48 hours after you said little consequence and that the Supreme Court was going to handle this speedily and finally. I would guess that you probably liked Dred Scott's decision.
I don't really recall when that came down.
Well, exactly. I only say that because that's what you really did not say how you felt about it in your inaugural. You just said you felt that the Supreme Court was going to take care of it speedily and finally. And 2 days later, they did. They said Dred Scott is the law. People can own slaves. And then you go to Kansas and enforce what they did.
Yeah, because that's what I was told to do. That's Supreme
Yeah,
Court.
the Supreme Court is the law of the land. The Supreme Court says slaves are allowed to happen. So
But now wait.
What's the voting happening now for, I
Well,
guess?
but wait. That's a little peanut butter and jelly because.
Sounds logical to me.
Well, no. Well, I bet it does,
if the
President
Supreme
Buchanan.
Court- if the
But no.
Supreme Court made the decision, then
But Kansas was not a slave state. What Dred
It
Scott's
was nothing.
Right, and Dred Scott just said that Congress had no constitutional power to deprive any person of an authority to own a slave in a territory. And Buchanan, as you said, Kansas was nothing. Kansas
Territory, yeah.
Right. Buchanan comes in and says, "This is going to be a slave state, and by my authority." That's the problem.
He had decided that that's the direction that
You
the
decided.
Supreme. Yes, I'm sorry. I had decided.
A lot of
that-
people talk about themselves in third person. You and Bob Dole.
I believe that I thought the Supreme Court was going in that direction. I felt that was the way I needed to go.
Right, but Kansas was not a state. It was not a.
I didn't make it a state when I said that.
Well,
I could not make it a state. That's against the law. You have to have, 2/3 majority of the other states?
You decided to end the troubles in Kansas by urging the admission
Urging is the key word there.
as a slave state, and you directed your presidential authority to this goal.
Okay, that's just it's urging. It isn't saying you have to. The presidents down through the years have urged people to do things, and they don't do it. It's up to the people.
Right, but you knew you had a Democratic Congress, and you knew the Supreme Court was certainly in favor of slavery.
Well, I was torn anyway between my Congress, which you call it, the Democratic Congress, and I had a great deal of friends from the South that I also supported. So I was kind of on the balance beam, as you would call it, I guess.
Why did you have such friends with? You're a Pennsylvanian. Why'd you have all this Southern loyalty?
Why do you have your friends? That's really an ignorant question. Of course, I have friends from Alabama. I have friends from Indiana. I have friends from all over the world. I don't understand that question.
Okay, let me elaborate on the question a little bit. The question is, you seem to be saying that one of the reasons you were torn on slavery is because you had so many Southern friends.
Yeah.
But in your day, there is no telephone, there is no air travel, there is no interstate highway. It's not like you were going down to the South for weekends.
Was it because...
So you were living with what's-his-name, and I'm confused on why you had such Southern sympathies and Southern sensibilities as a Pennsylvanian.
That's why it's such an ignorant statement you made. It's
This is why you didn't win re-election. You can't call people ignorant and get the vote.
When you are in Washington, D.C., you have friends from all over the country.
I agree with that, but why were you more favorable to the Southerns?
Because I felt sorry for the families and the children of the people that were going to go hungry because they were losing their way of life.
But what about the Northerners?
They weren't going to go hungry.
No, but did you own slaves?
No.
Right, that's why it's a weird thing.
I didn't believe in slavery, but I think people had the right.
The Civil War, did you sympathize with the South in order to, slow the progress of an impending Civil War, or however you want to phrase it?
I tried to avoid both sides of that. I truly did. I tried to be on the fence.
I don't mean for this to be adversarial, but every decision you made during your
presidency... You're always adversarial,
No, every decision you made during your presidency favors the South and slavery. What decision did you make that was on the line, that was on the fence, that favored the North, that favored no slavery?
I can't honestly remember.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Well, I can't remember the things that I did that didn't favor them.
You let the Supreme Court decide on slavery. You went along with it.
It was their choice, and they were governing me. They are the law of the land, and I'm the executive enforcer. That was all I was.
But the Kansas thing was not.
They had said the way they wanted us to go in their expression of the Dred Scott, and it had been very clear which direction the Supreme Court was going.
The Supreme Court, but I'm saying Kansas. Kansas, you put your foot in that one, on the side of slavery, clearly. Yeah. And also, I can't believe a former Secretary of State, wait a minute, I cannot believe a former Secretary of State and a former diplomat to Great Britain had no idea how the Supreme Court was going to rule 48 hours after his inaugural when he makes the statement that he wants the Supreme Court to handle this. I can't believe you didn't have an inkling how that was going to go. Think on that, President Buchanan, because we're going to take a quick break and come back with Matt and the President. And we're back here with Matt Morgan and President Buchanan, who's feeling the heat during this episode of The Exchange, because we are raking him over the coals on his decisions back in his day, but the presidents have to face that.
We do.
Yeah, and you called the press ignorant. Now that's not good.
No, I didn't call the press ignorant.
You called
I
me
called
ignorant.
you ignorant.
Well, I'm the press. That's what
No,
I'm here to
you're
hear.
not.
I'm here. I'm pressing you. By the way, the dinner with the presidents will be coming up at November 2nd at 4:30 p.m. at the All Occasions Catering Ballroom, 6989 Waldo, Delaware Road, Waldo, Ohio, 43356. Why do you need the zip code? It's in Waldo, but I read it anyway because I don't want President Buchanan jumping down my throat again, calling me ignorant. I want to give all the
I need to know that zip code because I live way out on the East Coast.
Trust me, you're in a whole different zip code these days. Benjamin Harris and Herbert Hoover will be there. Harry Truman, James Madison, U.S. Grant, Chester Arthur, Theodore Roosevelt, Warren Harding, Lou Henry Hoover, 31st presidential first lady, and your niece, the 15th president, James Buchanan's niece, will be speaking. Harriet Rebecca Lane, hostess at the White House. All right, let's get into it.
She would have been better at this discussion than I am. She knew when she was in my niece, when she was in the White House, she knew everything about everybody, and I'm looking forward to listening. She's going to be the speaker at our table, and I think people that are there, you won't need to ask me questions. Ask Harriet questions because she knew everything.
Do you think she liked you?
Yes, I know she did.
She did. Mm-hmm. What did she say? Because she was at the table with you last time, right? What did she have to say?
Not a whole lot. She was not the speaker at the table, so she kind of kept quiet unless people asked her questions. And there weren't a whole lot of questions because people don't know what type of questions to ask a first lady.
What did they ask you?
They asked me the question about my sexual preference, of course. They asked me the question about, did I start the war between the states? They asked me, shoot, a lot of them wanted to know where I was from because they heard that I was the only presidential candidate or president from Pennsylvania, and everybody was figuring it was someplace near Pittsburgh or something like, or Philadelphia. Well, it wasn't. It was a little town. Well, it was more closely related to Philadelphia than any place else. It was a little southeastern city. I can't remember a whole lot of the questions that were asked.
Does it cheese you off that, I mean, a lot of serious stuff happened on your watch. Whether people decide it's a good or bad decision, a lot of serious stuff happened. And yet, the number one question, the number one thing here in our time, 2024, is, was this the first homosexual president?
Yeah, I don't, like I told you in the first episode when we did this yesterday or whatever it was, I really don't think it's anybody's business, and I will stick with that. If people want to ask me that at the president's dinner, I will tell them I don't think it's any of your business. I'm sorry. I don't think we should be asking people. My mother would have had a fit if somebody had asked me if I was, when I was a little guy, if I was that way. And so I really don't think it's anybody's business. My mother also, if you had asked me, how much does your father make? She would have come unglued. Those are just questions you didn't ask back then.
Well, yeah, but my question is not, are you gay? My question is, does it bother you that that is what most people know about you?
Well, it bothers me that it's gone through the decades, the decades, and that seems to titillate the people who want to talk about my presidency. And there were a lot of other things that happened. And especially I would like them to think more about what I had done prior to my presidency, which was a lot of good stuff.
But it wasn't as if they weren't talking about this in your own time.
Well, I didn't hear it.
Well, I understand that there was rumor.
That's what you understand. I didn't hear it, so
Okay.
I didn't know that.
Matt, what do you understand about this whole thing in President Buchanan and his sexuality?
Specifically the sexuality.
He wasn't there.
Well, no, we weren't there. But I'm just saying, what do you understand it to be?
I mean, I think it's probably reasonable that they assumed it, especially at the time period. I mean, I don't know how the whole, the living situations and all that, but I mean, to live with somebody for, to my understanding, they met in the Senate and then became good friends, lived together for 13 years, and then
Mr. King.
Yes, yes.
Rufus.
Yes.
William Rufus King.
And then when Mr.
Strange
King
name.
and then when Mr. King died, I mean, neither of them were ever married, and they lived together until his
died.
death. So
He died.
I find it much more compelling to talk about the fact that the one person that he was engaged to ended up dying, and probably of suicide because her father made her get away from him. And also that Rufus King died after being inaugurated the vice president in Cuba or Puerto Rico, I'm not sure which, and he was so sick they couldn't get him back to Washington, D.C. to put his hand on the Bible. He died before he got back. So he was probably a vice president for a week or two, max.
So he goes down there, gets sick. They inaugurate him in Cuba.
Yeah,
or
because he
wherever,
was sick at the time, yeah.
and they can't get him back.
Nope.
He dies there.
Yep.
But he's buried here.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Now, how'd that make you feel?
Well, he was a great friend. He was a good person. Broke my heart.
Then comes this woman.
No, the woman came before him. No,
No,
that's right.
Yeah, then
was
she
after.
came. Yeah.
I don't know, the ways of the heart are strange.
And then you were with her for how long?
Not very long, I think months.
And she dies.
Yeah, after her father made her break off from me.
Let's Matt, find out this girl's name.
Yeah, please do.
And let's find out about this whole
How quickly
suicide
I forgot.
dilly-dally. Because we need to, I don't know.
Well, I don't think anybody knows for sure why she died. That is the supposition from some people.
So it is suspect.
Yeah,
Yeah. But why do they think she committed suicide?
broken heart. I mean, I've read that in several places.
Do we know her name?
Anne C. Coleman.
Yes.
That's
That's right.
Who was Miss Coleman?
Buchanan never married and remains the only bachelor president. In 1819, when he was 28 years old, he became engaged to Anne C. Coleman.
Now wait a second.
the
So that's
daughter-
before Rufus.
Yeah, that's what I thought when we were talking
Yeah.
about that. Yeah.
And she was the daughter of a wealthy Pennsylvanian family, and he broke off the engagement for an undisclosed reason, and shortly afterward, Coleman died, possibly a suicide.
I broke
No.
it off because her father hated me. That was the reason.
Now, do we know that to be fact?
I do.
That
The father hated him?
I'm the guy. I'm the president. Of course I know that was
But
what-
why did you break it off?
I didn't want her to go through all that. Having her father hate her.
But she committed suicide.
Well, we don't know that for sure.
So what do you think?
I think she did it.
Okay. So now in hindsight, do you regret that?
Of course I do.
Yeah.
Why would anybody want to cause somebody that much distress?
So you wish you would have married her?
I knew it wasn't going to happen by that time.
So do we know anything about her?
She was rich.
yeah,
Well,
she
that
She
helps.
was from a rich family.
She wasn't terribly pretty, if I recall.
The father was actively hostile to Buchanan.
There you go.
We do not know why, but one second.
Those are magnificent machines you people have nowadays.
We can get all the
All
dirt
that
right on
stuff,
you.
yeah.
Don't you wish these were around in your day?
I do.
President Buchanan?
I do.
Well, so he was hostile towards you. How'd you handle that?
We pretty much found a way to be apart.
Didn't get along.
We got along fine. It was just that I knew that it was causing her more problem than it was going to be worth. And she made it very difficult because she felt so bad about her father hating me. So,
So, do we know anything about your parents?
I know Dad was pretty well off, but he was not a landlord. He wasn't a big money guy, but he was pretty well off. He was okay. He had a good life.
And not to get back into why
I'm
people...
trying to remember what he did for a living. I did know that, but I've forgotten.
Well, it's been a while. And not
A few hundred years. Yeah.
Well, not to go back into your presidency and criticize, but one thing that I think a lot of people blame on you is the fact that because you...
I thought we were going back to criticize me.
No, I'm not.
But you're going to blame this on me.
No, I'm just going to say what happened. That after all this strife and you were vetoing the Republicans' bills, practically all of them, your party splits, and when the country nominated Abraham Lincoln, the Republicans, it was a foregone conclusion that he would be elected even though his name wasn't going to appear on the Southern ballot. And rather than accept a Republican president, the Republican administration, which would have been Abraham Lincoln's, the Southern fire-eaters advocated secession. Mm-hmm. So essentially, the atmosphere that you created and the presidency that you gave way to because of the split in your party did lead to talk of secession.
What part of not blaming me were you addressing?
Well, that wasn't blame.
Sounded like blame.
But well, what do you think about that?
I think it was a bad choice on the Southerners. Had I known that was going to happen, I think I would have tried to find a way to smooth that over. But I didn't even know it was going to happen, and I had feelings that there was problems, but I didn't feel like it was going that far.
Well, this is it. Well, this is what happened. President Buchanan, you got dismayed and hesitant.
Yeah.
You denied, now you were basically essentially a lame duck at this point, but
Yeah.
you denied the legal rights of the states to secede, but held that the federal government legally could not prevent them.
Yes, that's true.
So you hoped for a compromise, but the secessionists, your Southern buddies,
Didn't work.
Didn't want that. They wouldn't compromise with you. Then you took a more militant... Here. So this is where I think Buchanan gets in trouble. Every time something bad happens, he gets militant. And as several of your cabinet members resigned, you appointed Northerners and sent the Star of the West to carry reinforcements to Fort Sumter. And on January 9th, 1861, the vessel was far away.
The vessel?
The vessel.
What vessel?
I think the Star of the West.
I thought that was a train.
I think that's what's the vessel. I think that because there's no, I don't think submarines in this day.
Right. Well, I made some poor choices at that time, and that was moments before I was going to be out of office.
Well, but then you did revert to the policy of inactivity after that, and then you
Yeah, right, I
just
did.
got the heck out of there at that point.
Well, I had really tried to stay on the rope the whole time. Tried to stay, teetering up there, not making, because I knew we had troubles both ways, and there wasn't any good outcome that I could see by stepping one way or the other. So I didn't.
Well, but it seemed like you did both. Because here's what's interesting about you. Now, I'm not really sure how you did feel about slavery, to be honest, but it seems like every time, and it's not like this was we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you had to know at the time that these were not, because they were militant. It sounds like you were a bit of a militant guy, because when Kansas doesn't know which way it's going to go, you try to force them to be a slave state, which would make people think that you were a president who favored slavery. But yet, when secession is starting to happen, as you become a lame duck president, you decide to get militant toward the Southerners, and you appoint Northerners to your cabinet as all your Southern buddies are resigning from your cabinet, and you try to send a vessel to Fort Sumter. So it's strange.
Let it be strange. I don't really know how I respond to that, because you already have a direct direction you're going, and I don't see that, but
Just seems like
was-
you're reactionary.
I'm sorry, I am reactionary.
Yeah. Oh, so you agree with that?
Yeah.
Oh, then we agree.
Okay.
Yeah. But what do you think, Matt?
That was easy.
Well, I mean,
Now can I get a cushion for this chair?
I don't know that.
This is a 200-year-old behind.
I don't know that. I mean, I think it probably was a boat. By the way, I think that Fort Sumter isn't that like a like an island?
That's where they
like an
raised
island
the
fort?
American flag and sang.
Well, Fort Sumter was the start of the Civil War, so you know.
One.
They
Right.
shot
That was the
cannons
first
at
shot.
it.
Well,
Yeah,
he right. Well, it said he sent the Star of the West, which was a train, right,
I thought it was.
to
I don't
carry
know.
reinforcements to Fort Sumter. And then on January 9th, 1861, the vessel was far away.
Is that,
And he
is that-
left
is that the
in
date
March of
that-
1861.
Is that the date that the Battle of Fort Sumter happened?
Probably. That sounds about right.
I know that it was right at the end of my.
Oh, so that would have been it? Because you leave in March.
presidency. Yeah.
And this is on. So you sent reinforcements, but didn't get there.
Well, you know,
It was. It was.
he couldn't
hard.
time. He couldn't
It was
time
hard
when it was
to
going to
move
happen.
people in those days.
Yeah.
No, but it is interesting because I do want to give you credit in some regard
Oh,
here.
no need.
No, there's need. that I'm not sure that you were.
Also, sorry. Go ahead.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure that you were for slavery. It seems like you kind of blew with the wind. But in the wrong way.
Like you said, I was kind of reactionary that
Yeah.
way, and
Yeah.
yes, I did blow with the wind because I felt we needed to appease both sides to avoid having a civil war, but it
That's
didn't
why.
work.
That's why states would enter in like pairs.
Yeah, but that's
time.
just. I mean, again, no criticism here. But no, listen. But it doesn't sound like most people who blow with the wind. They blow with the way that people are going. It seems like you blew against the wind. When the wind blew one way, when the Supreme Court said, when Kansas is coming in and nobody knows what's going to happen, you try to put your heavy hand there and say, listen, you're going to be a slave state. And then when the South and your whole cabinet, which is full of Southerners, say, well, we are going to be a slave state and we're going to leave, you all of a sudden decide, oh, wait a second, I'm going to put all these Northerners in office and I'm going to go against you now.
I mean,
You don't know all the conversation that was going on at the time, so I can't tell you what all that conversation was about. I don't think anybody knows what all that conversation was about, and I truly believe that if he was a president worth his salt, he would understand. I had to understand what was coming tomorrow, as opposed to what happened yesterday.
But it is interesting to know that you also denied the right of states to secede, but
Yeah.
you also held that the federal government legally
Didn't have
could
a
not
right.
do that.
Yeah.
But you essentially tried to make Kansas a slave state, so it didn't seem like breaking precedent was a problem for you in
Yeah,
the past.
I felt that was the best direction for them. I didn't say they had to. I think if you check that out, there was no presidential edict that said they had to be a slave state.
oh,
It sounds like you got ticked
I
that
did.
secessionists were not listening to you.
I got ticked at both sides. No one was listening to each other. and
But you
that's-
appointed Northerners when they left.
I had also appointed Southerners before they left. I mean, yeah, there were just not enough people listening to each other. That was the problem at that time. Much like your people right now in the United States here. And what is this, 2024?
2024.
Holy cow.
Holy cow.
I got to get home.
What do you think?
I'm late.
What do you think, Matt? You got a dinner coming up Saturday.
Yeah.
I think that
We're learning all about James Buchanan tonight. I bet you anybody watching these programs knows more about James Buchanan than they ever knew
I
before.
hope so.
Yeah.
I know more about him.
Yeah, well, that helps.
Also, I mean, even if he was a Southern sympathizer, I
I
mean,
would say that's what I was.
I think,
Well, clearly.
yeah, but I mean, I think you could be, you know, both I don't know that it's necessarily strange for a Southern sympathizer who was in office to be like, look, you do not have the right to secede, because I mean, it's like just because you sympathize with the South doesn't mean you want the Union to break up. It's that whole thing. Like
I think that's where he was.
I think
now-
he was just
but
like,
now-
you guys
but
can
now
do
wait a
what
second.
you're doing.
Whoa.
The North can do what the North
Whoa.
is doing.
Whoa.
Just
Oh, see, but that's where you leave it. See, but that's not what he did. See, he's always knee jerk. It's not just I'm a Southern sympathizer and I don't want you guys to secede. When they decide they're going to secede, he tries to bring the federal government down on them, then decides, well, I really can't do that. So as his cabinet is leaving him, instead of reappointing him with the same ilk of people, he brings in Northerners, which he has to know is going to tick off the secessionists.
I wasn't sure.
Well, it couldn't going over well at that time. Secession's going on.
I was leaving.
so I mean,
I was leaving within the next
But you're
3
sending
months.
reinforcements too to Fort Sumter.
but Buchanan had also made the point to where secession was not allowed. So I mean, like the Southerners were already leaving. So I don't think that assigning more Southern sympathizers to the to the cabinet would have done much good. Because then I think at that point, like you have. The Southern sympathizers in your cabinet are going to be more on the side of
Antagonistic.
just like letting the South do.
Well, he didn't
like,
fire
secede.
him. Well, no, wait, he didn't fire him. They
left.
resigned.
Yeah, but you said then he appointed Northerners. I don't think that when they left, he assigning more Southern sympathizers would have been useful.
Do you think a Southern sympathizer would have taken the job after they're all leaving at that point?
That's kind of what he's saying. It wouldn't
Right.
have been any good. to
Right.
do.
But
you're saying
now
that it
what-
doesn't
but-
make any sense that he hired a cabinet full of Northerners. If all the Southerners are gone, then who else are you hiring?
Right, but it's his business to send reinforcements to Fort Sumter. That's militant. When he decides he can't stop them compromise, he can't talk them into it, and his whole cabinet's leaving and the country's falling apart and the Civil War is about to bust out.
He doesn't know that.
Well,
I think
you're
he-
sending troops to Fort Sumter.
They
think
may
he
have
pro-
sent him there to protect that piece of land that was northern piece of land. Go ahead.
But they advocated secession, and they're saying they're going to do it.
I mean, it's pretty. I mean, I think it was. I mean, I'm not for sure on how long the siege was or anything like that. But they had.
The pressure's on President Buchanan.
My derriere is killing me.
But
I bet in office it was killing you some
know,
days too. Those Southern secessionists were just.
I was getting it kicked.
I assume once the cannon started showing up on the shorelines and pointed at Fort Sumter, I think you pretty good and well knew what was happening at that
He
point.
was just protecting it. Yeah.
But he didn't get them there in time.
Well, I mean, what are you gonna do? I mean, he sent them. It's better than not sending them, I guess.
All I'm saying is this, and it could be one or the other, and we don't know because we weren't there.
No.
He was either the most detached president who had no idea what was going on, or he was the most inadequate. Because it would seem as if to not know 48 hours later how the Supreme Court's going to rule on slavery after you say Supreme Court's going to have the final say, and then also after you're meeting with secessionists and trying to hammer this out, to not know that secession's about to break out at Fort Sumter, that there's not going to be a big problem there, that either you're totally detached and have no idea what's going on anywhere, or just bad choices.
I don't believe anybody is ever that rigid one way or the other. So I think he was probably ignorant and trying to appease everybody. That's what I thought.
So you think you were a people pleaser,
Yes, I was.
and that's ultimately what did you in.
Yeah, I think that probably did.
And you would also think that a man who may have been, again, none of our business, homosexual, was probably sympathetic to slavery.
I don't understand that relationship at all.
Well, because you would think that a man who was homosexual was probably more of a liberal ilk, live your own life, kind of a libertarian stance, don't tell me what to do, because I'm sure he did not like living in the closet. And so I don't think he would like that people were controlled by other people.
I think that's a supposition of a 21st century person. I don't think we can know that. I don't know what he was.
I guess I'm just saying the simple philosophical nature of somebody's life, that if you are living in the closet and you are so clearly being persecuted for your sexual preference, I can't imagine you would like anybody being persecuted for anything because you're being persecuted.
Again, I think that's a 21st century view of it. I'm not sure people thought of it that way back then. So I mean, I have no idea how people thought of
But you didn't own slaves.
homosexuality.
But you didn't own slaves.
No,
Right, which is interesting.
didn't have the money.
but along the way you did.
Yeah, I didn't believe in slavery.
Right. And you were sympathetic to slavery though.
I was sympathetic to the families that owned slaves.
But not sympathetic to the North.
Maybe he
I was
just
sympathetic to the North, but not, I thought they had everything going for them, and the South did not.
maybe he was trying to prevent an economic collapse. I mean, you would have. I mean, if you got rid of all the slaves in the South, which they did after the
collapsed.
Civil War. I mean, the South's economy after the Civil War,
Yep.
it pretty much bottomed out. You couldn't sell the cotton for as cheap as you were and undercut all the other market prices in the world. I mean, you had to actually compete.
Yeah, but slavery did not go away.
Well,
It went hiding.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
it's not exactly like the South became liberated at that point. It took another 100 years.
well, yeah, I mean,
So if their economy collapsed, it was because of decisions they made. Oh, excuse me, I won't serve you in my restaurant. Excuse me, you can't come to my school. Excuse me, you drive my car.
Well,
I
there
mean,
were
there's a problem
a
there.
lot of problems like that, but by the fact that slavery was illegal, they had to do it clandestinely, and if it was clandestine, then they weren't going to get as much productivity out of those slaves, even if they kept them going.
Well, President Buchanan, that's what's interesting to me, and may I just get your opinion, and all it would be is an opinion on this. I think Matt said it exactly right, that the South did take an economic hit after the Civil
Yes,
War.
they did.
But that's why, to any person, no matter how you felt about slavery, even if you were the most bigoted pro-slavery person in the world, it's economically stupid, just on its face. Even if you totally believe in it, or totally think it's awful, it's not good for your business to say, I won't take your money.
And that's what I said right from the beginning.
but that's,
didn't
I mean,
wanna
that wasn't slavery. The slavery wasn't I won't take your money. The slavery is I'm not gonna pay you and you're gonna make me money.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean,
but
there was a.
But there were moral issues of the day, and clearly in Pennsylvania, President Buchanan was aware of these moral issues.
How do we get away from the one side to the other? I did.
I'm just saying,
Like I
it's not
said-
like you grew up in Mississippi.
Like I said from the very beginning, I worried about the families of the people that were slaveholders because I knew that their money and their lives would go down the crapper.
Well, I understand that, but clearly your northern buddies, the Republicans, did not feel that way.
Some of them did.
But the voting public.
There was a name for people like me, but yeah.
Yeah, but the voting public voted the other party in. At that point, you think you'd have thought,
I don't think it was 100% voted for it.
we gave them the control of the
Okay,
House.
all right. That means that you may have 49% of the people felt the way I did.
And you vetoed a lot of this stuff.
I did.
Yeah, so there you go. There's that. Anyway, you want to talk more with President Buchanan? He will be at the dinner with the president.
I hope they have padded chairs.
Saturday, November 2nd at 4:30 at All Occasions Catering, 6989 Waldo, Delaware Road in Waldo, Ohio. All kinds of people there. Warren G. Harding, Theodore Roosevelt, Chester Arthur, U.S. Grant, Andrew Johnson, James Madison, Herbert Hoover, Benjamin Harrison. You know what? I just realized your name is not on this list.
No, because I'm not a speaking person.
No,
my
but-
name is next to...
Non-speaking president. You're not down here.
Well, my name was next to somebody. Well, it's not now.
Now, see?
I don't have
Once
to go.
again, President Buchanan.
It's tough to get out of that
God
grave.
almighty. We didn't even get to talk about your niece. And there'll be platters from all the presidents there that you'll eat. It's going to be wonderful.
It will be.
And again, election night here in 2024, November the 5th, 7:15, we'll go live here on the station, wwgh1071.com, TuneIn app. President Buchanan, it was wonderful to have you here. I hope you enjoyed it.
Nice to be here, yes.
Do you want to say anything to as we head into a presidential election here in 2024 as we get ready to wrap this up,
I
President Buchanan?
absolutely do. Vote.
There you go. If nothing else, vote. For Matt Morgan, President Buchanan, Scott Spears, heading for the dugout.